guys, it's Melanie. Welcome to my channel. It is time for day 4 of my Once Upon a Book Club Advent box. So stay tuned. So I have my little book here, the 12 Days of Book Clubmas, and if you're just starting out here, I recommend going back to day 1. The Advent box didn't end up arriving because of like all the postal stuff during COVID, so it didn't arrive until the first of the year. So I'm spreading it out, doing it this way, and I'm reading one story in here because we got a whole freaking book of short stories. So I'm reading one story in here each time I do one of these videos and opening the gift that goes along with it. So for day 4, it is An Adventure Through Literature by Logan Ashley. Amara woke up. She made her bed. She brushed her teeth. She combed her hair. She ate some toast. She went to class. She said hi to her friend Iris. She went home. She made dinner. She pet her dog. She watched TV. She went to sleep. And no one would ever know. Amara's life as the main character was a boring one, mostly because no one had ever picked up her book. It had sat for years on a shelf in the back of Antonio's Antiques and Books, where no one had ever given it a second glance. In fact, the layers of dust on the pages made her sneeze so much she was surprised that perusing customers didn't hear her as they passed by. Truthfully, after a certain number of years, how many exactly she couldn't be sure, she stopped making her bed. She rarely combed her hair, and she skipped breakfast. She stopped going out of her way to see Iris. She lived off cereal for dinner, and sleep always seemed to escape her. Amara had read her own story millions of times, for she had lived it every day, and yet no one from the real world ever seemed interested in meeting her. One morning, after a fitful night of sleep, she awoke so suddenly that she startled the Z's 3 sentences over. After apologizing to the lethargic letters, she carefully climbed a few pages over and pounded on Iris's door 6 chapters early. "What?" she heard Iris scream from the other side. The door flew open and her friend stood there looking very unlike she did daily on campus. Her hair stood up straight in the back and a baggy tee hung off one shoulder. "Amara, what are you doing here?" Iris stuck her head out the door and peered down the page, as if expecting someone to storm up and reprimand Amara for skipping ahead in the reading. As if anyone cared. "I'm leaving, and I want you to come with me," Amara said confidently, still full of the adrenaline coursing through her from her recent dream. "What do you mean leaving? Like, going into the epilogue?" Amara and Iris had skipped the epilogue for the last decade since there was never any point. "Nope, I'm leaving the book." Iris stared at Amara for a few moments before bursting into tear-filled laughter. She clutched her sides and wept tears of joy at the joke her best and only friend had to be playing. After over a minute, Amara huffed, turned, and began to head back to her house to pack. "Wait," Iris muttered between giggles. "What are you talking about? Seriously, I don't understand." Amara stopped with one leg over the page and looked back at her friend, unsure if she should bother explaining how she'd been feeling for years, of being unable to go through another day of monotonous repetition. Sighing, she replied, "I'm leaving the book. I'm going to check out some of the other stories in the shop that can never seem to stay in stock. Haven't you noticed no one has so much as looked at us in years? Why? I want to find out, and ideally, I won't come back. It's not like anyone would ever pick up our book and notice anyway." She waited as Iris's eyes glazed over as she spoke, and she was sure her one companion wouldn't be coming with her. "I just want to experience something different. I'm so tired of living every day exactly the same as the last. I would love to go on an adventure or see something new just once." She looked up, having gotten lost in her speech, to find that Iris was gone, having disappeared back into the house. Amara sighed and headed home, packing some bare essentials, a few random vowels and consonants she had lying around in case she needed a quick getaway, and wrote the instructions to taking care of Scrappy down quickly for the narrator. They always seemed to be able to predict what the dog was going to do next, so she wasn't too worried. Shutting the front door, she heard panting and footsteps coming up the drive. "Oh good, you haven't left yet." "If you think you're going to talk me out of it, you're a little late," she huffed, turning around to find Iris lugging an overstuffed backpack up the walkway. She adjusted the straps that looked about ready to snap and smirked. "I've been watching you take the same boring classes for decades. If I ever thought I was going to talk you out of something, I would have tried it years ago." Amara cracked a smile. "Hey, the history of the chair was actually really informative." Iris giggled and shoved her playfully. "Okay, so how do we even get out of here?" Amara had been so excited to just pursue her new adventure, she hadn't even considered that she had never left her book before. Didn't even really know how. "I suppose we go up." Amara pointed to the text typed far above their heads. "I imagine it can't go on forever, right?" Iris shrugged and looked over Amara's shoulder toward her front door. "If we're going to climb, can I toss some of my stuff inside? I think I overdid it on the packing." With a hair straightener, 3 colors of nail polish, a set of beach-scented candles, and a massive bag full of accessories tucked safely in the house, they were ready to begin their ascent. How much farther? Iris sounded so far away, but Amara couldn't bring herself to look down. They had to just keep going. "Almost there," Amara fibbed, hoping her shortened breath didn't give her away. They had already had one close call when Iris accidentally grabbed a ha-ha and it giggled and shook, nearly causing her to fall. Luckily, a well-placed question mark caught her as she dropped down a paragraph and had to climb it all over again. Amara reached up for the next row of letters, but instead of the coarse text, she found smoothness. Craning her neck, she found fingers that had caught the top of the page, eager for a break. She pulled herself over the edge and laid on top of her whole world, gazing at the strange sky above her. Dark brown with varying shades, she assumed this must be what real wood looked like. "I'll have to take that history of paper class next," she thought, before rolling onto her stomach to encourage Iris down the page. Pulling her friend up, the two stared at their surroundings. Dark and mysterious, it had been so long since someone had opened their book, and they'd been able to see the outside world, that neither of them remembered which direction to go. "I guess this way?" Amara and Iris shrugged, running towards the back cover. They carefully climbed over the bound front cover and saw their immediate neighbor leaning into them, haphazardly shoved back on the shelf by the last patron who'd selected it. "Do we knock?" Iris said, unsure. Amara rolled her eyes, grabbed Iris's hands, and jumped, clearing the distance between the two covers and falling into the undiscovered pages. Coughing and standing up slowly, Amara looked around at the strange new land they found themselves in. Lavish and well-kept landscaping led up the drive to the biggest building Amara or Iris had ever seen, complete with some of the most well-dressed people they'd ever seen. "I knew I should have packed some of my evening wear," Iris muttered as she chased after Amara, who was walking hypnotically up the path towards the house. "What are you doing?" Iris grabbed her arm and pulled her into the shrubbery. "These people have no idea where we've come from. They're in the middle of their story, and you just want to go barging up and interrupting?" Amara, who had rolled her eyes today more than she had in 20 years, felt them strain from overuse. "What did you think we were going to do? Hide and watch from afar? I want to live, Iris, and the only way I'm going to get to do that is by meeting new people and experiencing new things. If you want to go back home, go ahead. I have to keep going." Amara stepped around her and started toward the house again. She heard Iris's footsteps close behind her, and she smiled to herself, grateful that her friend was staying. As much as she didn't want to admit it, she was a nervous wreck as she approached the door. She reached for the ornate door knocker to rap on the door when she realized that the door was already ajar. Amara pushed on the heavy wood and it swung inward, releasing a blast of jazz music being pumped through the house. "Amara," Iris pointed to a live band inside the massive foyer, wailing on trumpets and being enjoyed by dozens of guests dancing in ways they had never seen before. No one even looked at the strangers making their way into the house. No one even seemed bothered that there were more people in the house that already appeared to be nearing capacity. They wandered through the rooms, taking in the incredible sights and sounds and smells, all of which so vastly different from what they were used to at home. Women adorned with feathers and pearls drank and laughed, smoking cigarettes the length of pencils, and men in flawlessly tailored suits and strategically placed hats swung them off their feet and onto the dance floor with cat-like grace. The entire party was orchestrated like a choreographed dance, not a single thing out of place, but nothing seemed to be there for a reason. Every patron appeared more glamorous than the next, that it was impossible to discern who was hosting the party. Amara nodded toward the back door, and they exited the house, gawking at a massive pool, another van, and the fireworks exploding over the dock before heading for the quiet tree line. Where the hell are we? Iris said, smiling ear to ear, wiping glitter and sweat off her brow. I feel like I've read this one in one of my classes. Amara stared at the house, light pouring from every window, people spilling onto the lawn to escape together into the trees, and then she saw him. There. She pointed towards the dock, watching a man reach his hand toward a faint light in the distance. It's Gatsby. We're in the Great Gatsby. While Iris frequently made fun of her for taking an abundance of classes instead of just finding one subject she liked, Amara had never found a subject she didn't enjoy at least a little. She always wanted to learn and explore new things, and it's not like anyone ever read their book to notice that she kept switching classes. She just changed the words a little, and no one was the wiser. She gasped, giddy, watching the green light spin at the end of Daisy's dock, realizing they had stumbled onto one of her favorite novels of all time. Iris, we're in the freaking Great Gatsby, she said, turning suddenly to look for Nick Carraway in the direction she assumed was his house, remembering that he sees Gatsby reach his hand out toward the light. Yeah, you said that, you weirdo. I haven't read it. What happens? A lot. We're still at the beginning of the book. He hasn't even been reintroduced to Daisy yet. Amara points over her shoulder to him, still standing alone on the dock as the party raged behind him. He actually dies in a couple hundred pages. Ah, that sucks. Does he know? Iris looked at the man, dealing with internal battles so much more complicated than his impending external death. I mean, probably. He lives his story over and over every day, just like we do, I'd assume. Truthfully, I just feel bad he's in a never-ending loop of never getting the girl. That's gotta be horrible. Amara glances back toward the dock, realizing that maybe not everyone gets a happily ever after. At least they had that going for them back home. She sighed and looked at Iris. As much as I love this story, maybe we should keep going. It's not as much fun if I already know what happens, she admitted, avoiding the fact that Gatsby's fate had mildly dimmed the appeal of being here. Iris snorted and let sarcasm saturate her words. Oh good, we'll have to choose our next jump based on books you haven't read. That ought to be easy. Amara smirked and grabbed her hand, tugging her back toward the party. They danced and enjoyed themselves as they went, soaking up the ambiance of a crowd unlike any they'd ever experienced in their home story. Finally, escaping out the front door, covered in confetti, they centered themselves once again and started climbing. Iris and Amara's hands were still linked as they landed much more gracefully into this new story than they had on Gatsby's front lawn. Surrounded by woods and the calls of birds, this was a peaceful scene, quite a stark contrast to the raging party they had left behind. They walked through the trees, enjoying the fresh air and sunlight that filtered through the canopy. There was no one in sight. Where do you think we are? Iris asked, plucking a wildflower off the ground and weaving it into her hair. We could be anywhere. Thoreau or Twain or Meyer. Iris looked up and raised her eyebrow at the last suggestion. What? These could be the Twilight Woods? Amara admitted there weren't enough conifer trees for them to be in Washington, but that didn't mean she wasn't going to secretly hold out hope there was a sparkling vampire running around nearby. Shattering the quiet, a scream echoed through the trees, followed quickly by a sharp boom from somewhere distant. Amara and Iris looked at each other, eyes wide. Oh crap. Amara hadn't read in a while, but that cannon sound was so familiar she slowly backed up toward the way they'd come. Iris, I don't think we should be here, she muttered, much quieter than they had been talking only moments before. Amara looked toward her friend to see her staring up toward the treetops. Asleep and cinched to a branch was Katniss Everdeen, the main character of the Hunger Games. Oh God, we're gonna die here. What happens if we die outside our book? Iris was panicking and in turn starting to shriek. Amara glanced back toward the base of the tree where she saw the careers, or the strongest competitors, asleep in the leaves, so far unaware of the intruders a few dozen yards away. Iris, I need you to calm down. In a few minutes, Katniss is going to wake up and drop a nest of governmentally enhanced wasps on those kids down there, and we cannot be here when that happens. As she spoke, Amara watched the treetops for a sign of Rue, Katniss's partner in this scheme and a central character that drove the plot forward immensely. Unsurprisingly, there was no sign of her sneaking and staying unnoticed was her strong suit. Damn, she's good, she thought. As they slowly backed up toward the way they'd come, Amara saw Katniss start to rouse. Iris and Amara froze, not wanting to catch one of her masterfully placed arrows if she saw them. not knowing that they weren't tributes in this ruthless game. Katniss saw something from the trees that must have been Rue, and she turned and started climbing toward the nest. Seizing their opportunity, Amara and Iris turned and ran into the forest, away from the horrific scene about to unfold. Spotting the edge of the page, they started hoisting themselves up, and finally broke through the treetops and out the top cover of the book, leaving the screams of the terrorized careers behind. I'm really enjoying this story. Collapsing on the top of the novel with their heads in their hands, Amara and Iris sat unmoving and unspeaking. In shock from what they had just experienced, Iris was the one to finally break the silence. How do they do that every day? Every time someone reads their story, they have to do that all over again? I'm traumatized, and I didn't even witness anyone. She trailed off, wiping a stray tear with her fingertips. I think I want to go home. Iris, it was a bad experience, I'll give you that. But they're okay. That's the story they were given. They might not like it, but they can't do anything to stop people from reading it, from experiencing it along with them. Amara's words did little to comfort her now fully sobbing friend, her only friend, who had left all they had ever known to join her on this twisted ride that had just taken them from two stories featuring characters who are faced with immense trauma and grief. I'm not going to make you keep going with me, but I can't go back. Iris looked up and stared at Amara, unsure of what she was hearing. Iris, I'm sorry, but I wanted to experience more than our boring and mundane life. We didn't do anything. No one read our stupid book because there wasn't any point. They were basically just reading about their own everyday lives. We don't have a romance arc. We don't have a government overthrow. We don't have any reason to make people want to keep reading. Why were we ever written? Iris stood and wiped her eyes for a final time, turned and walked back toward home without saying anything. Amara watched her go before leaning her head against her knees, sitting atop one of the scariest but most thrilling moments of her endless existence, wishing her friend could understand. We were written for friendship. Amara looked up toward Iris's voice, realizing her friend had stopped at the edge of the pages and was looking right at her. Our story might not be the greatest ever told, but we were solid. Through the epilogue, we were best friends. Or do you not remember? You haven't wanted to go there in years. Amara had stopped going to the epilogue. What would have been the point? We were together. We drove off into the sunset like Thelma and Louise. We were the friendship our readers aspired to have, Amara. Iris turned back toward their book and continued walking. I guess you never realized that sometimes people don't need a grand adventure. They just need someone they can count on. Her last words stung as she wandered back to the far end of the bookshelf and well out of Amara's sight. Left with nothing but a guilty feeling, Amara picked herself up and started heading in the same direction. Iris was right, of course. She had always been there for Amara, no matter what schemes she came up with to keep their lives interesting. Heck, she left the only world she'd ever known because she didn't want Amara to be alone on this journey. She really was the best friend anyone would ever want, and not just because she was written to be. She simply was. Amara continued wiping her tears and began her descent back home. She could apologize. She could make amends. They would be okay. They always were. With Iris's hand to ground her, jumping was mildly terrifying, but at least she was back home. Standing and dusting off her jeans, she squinted in the sunlight. She didn't remember it being this bright, nor did she remember the birds singing so sweetly, or the giant castle in front of her. Damn it. She must have jumped into the wrong book. Through her tears, everything looked the same. Ugh. She turned and was going to start to climb out when a voice stopped her. Well, hello. They hadn't made contact with any main characters in any of the books they'd visited until now. Turning her head, Amara was face to face with Princess Belle of Beauty and the Beast. You're a new face. I don't believe you visited our chateau before. We get many visitors, and I try to make each of their acquaintances when they visit. I think I'd remember someone dressed like you. Her voice was as sweet as chocolate souffles, and her sweeping winter gown was as far from Amara's jeans and zip-up hoodie as could be. Hi, I'm Amara. Amara waved from where she stood, nerves seemingly freezing her in place. Amara, that's a beautiful name. I'm Belle. It's lovely to meet you. Her smile was enchanting and melted Amara's frozen legs as she beckoned her forward. Would you like to come inside? We're having a bit of a tea at the moment, and I'd love to hear your story. I'm not sure if you know this, but I just adore stories. Belle led the way up the grand front staircase into a massive foyer where a plethora of housekeepers and attendants bustled around busily. Belle continued to talk as they entered the dining room, mentioning the names of each of the attendants who helped them get settled. Once the tea was served and they were treated to a decadent array of pastries, Amara began speaking. "I'm sure it's obvious, but I'm not from here." Belle nodded, her undivided attention solely on her. "I'm actually from a book down the shelf, and I left so I could explore some of the stories I've been able to read and enjoy over the last several years. My story was quite boring, and I wanted to experience something new. My best friend, came along with me, and we first entered the Great Gatsby." To this, Belle squealed. "No, you didn't. That's incredible," she chimed, though she carefully didn't ask any questions, allowing Amara to continue. "It truly was, but also a bit sad to see Gatsby still hanging onto the green light so strongly. It's been almost 100 years since his story was written, and yet he's always forced to hang on to something he can never have." Belle nodded solemnly, understanding. "Next, we found ourselves in a forest teeming with wildlife, and as we came to find out, danger." Amara was actually starting to enjoy this recount of her and Iris's adventures from the last few hours, despite her friend not being here. "We found ourselves in the Hunger Games. Have you read that one?" Belle nodded, encouraging her to go on. "We accidentally showed up at the scene where Katniss drops her jackers nest on the careers, so naturally we had to hightail it out of there." At this point, Amara slows down, not sure if she wanted to share what happened immediately prior to her jump into Belle's front lawn. She took a deep breath and continued. "I was so wrapped up in these experiences that I didn't see what I was doing to my friend Iris. She didn't ask for this. She was completely fine with living our lives the way we were living them within the pages of our book. But she came anyway. And when she said she'd had enough after listening to the screams in the Hunger Games, I blew up. I questioned why we were ever even written into existence if there was no point to our story. But it turns out I just kept missing the point." Amara could feel her eyes welling up again, and Belle, as gracious as to be expected, handed her a clean handkerchief and stayed silent, giving her the opportunity to be sad. "She's my best friend, and our story was so obviously written for the best friends out there, and I can't believe I took her for granted." Belle reached forward and took Amara's hand with her lithe palm, massaging the back gently, as Amara imagined a mother would do. "It's understandable you wanted to experience something new. Everyone feels this way at some point in their life. However, you shouldn't forego all that you have already been given." Belle stood and smoothed her skirts, pulling Amara up with her. "Come on, I want to show you something." Belle guided her back through the foyer and pushed open a set of double doors on the opposite side of the entryway. There before them stood the grandest library Amara had ever seen, with multiple levels, ladders and stairs, nooks and crannies overflowing with literature. "This is my favorite room in the castle, for obvious reasons," she chuckled. "But it also helps me when I get stuck. I was like you. I remember saying specifically, there must be more than this provincial life on more than one occasion. I lived in a small village where every single day was exactly the same, and I wanted adventure in the great wide somewhere more than anything." Belle moved through the room and almost seemed to glow as she reached the center of it, bathing in the joy her collection brought her. "I had an adventure getting here. I truly did. I rescued my father, and I saved a beast from himself. I did more in a few months than I'd done the entire rest of my life. But then suddenly, I found myself having a new life." As if on cue, the double doors opened once again, and in strolled Prince Adam, formerly known as the Beast, clutching the hand of a young boy who immediately ran toward Belle. Clutched in his arms was a bundle of cloth and a beautiful baby fast asleep. They stood in the center of the library, an image of absolute bliss. Confused, Amara stepped forward. "I'm sorry, but this didn't happen in your story. I've read it dozens of times, and you don't have any kids. You have a happily ever after with the Beast, and that's the cue for the happily ever after text to scroll. How did you do this?" Belle looked up from her baby's peaceful face to Amara's baffled one and smiled. "There's so much more to our stories than what is written. We are not who others expect us to be." She separated herself from her family and scoured the shelves for whatever it was she was looking for. Successfully finding it, she turned toward Amara and handed her a book she had never seen before. And now we're supposed to open our gift. So here's our day 4 gift, and it feels like it's a book. And one difference, okay, so in the past, all of their Advent boxes were adult boxes, And this year they offered adult or YA. All of the gifts are the same except for the books. So in the adults you get adult books, and in the YA you get YA books. And so I got the YA books. Okay, so the book in here is This Heart of Mine by C.C. Hunter. Let's see. Black with like almost like a painted red font. This says, a new heart saved her life, but will it help her find out what really happened to its donor? 17-year-old Leah McKenzie is heartless. An artificial heart in a backpack is keeping her alive. However, this solution only offers her a few years, and with her rare blood type, a transplant isn't likely. Living like you are dying isn't all it's cracked up to be, but when a heart becomes available, she's given a second chance at life, except Leah discovers who the donor was, a boy from her school, and they're saying he killed himself. Plagued with dreams since the transplant, she realizes she may hold the clues to what really happened. Matt refuses to believe his twin killed himself. When Leah seeks him out, he learns they are both having similar dreams, and he's certain it means something. While unraveling the secrets of his brother's final moments, Leah and Matt find each other and a love they are terrified to lose. But life and even new hearts don't come with guarantees. Who knew living took more courage than dying? C.C. Hunter's This Heart of Mine is a haunting, poignant tale about living and dying and surviving grief, guilt, and heartache while discovering love and hope in the midst of sadness. All right then. Let's continue on with our story. And also, I'm loving this story. Okay. Read this. I read it recently and I really enjoyed it. I'd love for you to come back and we can discuss it. Perhaps start our own little book club together. She paused, then added, and maybe your friend would like to come as well. Amara smiled and nodded, eager to get home and see Iris. She thanked her host and turned to leave. Amara, Belle called after her as she headed for the library doors. Don't forget, you're not limited to the words of others. You can write your own story. Amara's smile grew, said thank you once again, and headed out the front lawn where she began her ascent towards home. Iris was bundled on her sofa in a hoodie and a pint of ice cream when the banging on her door nearly scared her out of her skin. There were no locks in their story, there was never a need for them, and the door flew open after a few seconds of not being answered. Like a whirlwind, Amara stood in front of her TV, talking faster than she had in ages. I am so sorry, Iris. I need you to know that I am so grateful to have a friend like you in my life to keep me sane and grounded. I would have gone crazy years ago if it weren't for you, Amara continued. I'm also sorry I didn't realize the point of our book sooner. I spend so much time reading, you would think that at some point I would have actually paid attention while reading our own story. You deserve better than that, which is why, she trailed off, beckoning to Iris to come outside. The mischievous grin on Amara's face made Iris roll her eyes and smirk as she threw off the blanket and walked outside in socks. What is going on? Iris yelled over the noise. Bulldozers and dump trucks littered her front yard, carrying what looked like piles of letters. Amara waved her hands frantically to get the machines to cease their noise. We are going to write our story together. Amara pulled a book from behind her back. And we're going to read this together because we have a standing appointment with Princess Belle for tea and pastries at her castle. Iris's jaw widened before she exclaimed, You went into a fairy tale without me? She smacked Amara in the arm with mock annoyance. It was an accident, I swear, Amara said, through giggles. But she did teach me a lot in a very short span of time, and I can't wait for you to meet her. At least, if you'd like to come with me next time. Iris pulled her friend into a tight hug, pinning her arms to her side. I'm so excited to go on this new adventure with you, her words muffled by the fabric of Amara's hoodie. Finally releasing Amara and stepping back to look at the chaos on her front yard, Iris sighed. It's never a dull day with you as a friend, is it? Amara laughed, eager to say goodbye to the plethora of dull days they'd had for the last several decades. So, where do we start? Iris asked, staring at the sea of letters and punctuation marks in front of them. Amara struggled and grabbed her best friend's hand. I don't know, but I do know one thing. At least it will be ours. Smiling at each other, they began another ascent into the sky of letters with backpacks full of Arial text. They spent the day cutting and pasting, prying dots off of eyes, which is much harder than it looks, and finally climbed down to admire their work. While most writers probably would have started at the beginning, Amara and Iris were about the most unconventional writers that had ever existed. So they started where they wanted to, at the end, with their favorite phrase, and they all lived happily ever after. Did you guys enjoy that story? Did you not? Comment down below and let me know. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a big thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos like this, click that subscribe button down below. And until next time, remember to always be completely you. Bye!